KALASK!
Greetings, KALASK. Welcome.
Greetings, yes.
You have an opening statement for us today?
Yes, now, first and foremost, we're perhaps best starting with an update on your current situation, as we're aware there's still the whole upheaval idea on your plate of cold drama, whatever the fuck, right? So, first and foremost, as we are suggested, there'd likely be a few more weeks, and over here in Vessel's regions, your first measurements have been lifted to a certain degree. At least to the degree for a vessel, there's no further restrictions on the daily life. However, we are also aware for a vessel and for our observation that in your area of your bed, most in your first more North American region, as well as our European regions, there are still, or even more so, the idea of confinement, etc. And it is very likely that you will get listings in numerous areas for your current quarantine measurements. Then there will be more infections. Then there will be quarantine measurements coming back in charge, getting increased, less infections. Then there will be listing again of certain restrictions. Then there will be infection, etc. You will like to go back and forth numerous times, right? So we see the stretching in your summer months, so a couple more months. We don't see this reaching all the way into your autumn. So therefore, it's perhaps the idea. One moment. Yes, perhaps better. Therefore, it's the idea you're currently on a time frame, reality, where you are in your back and forth movement. You can of course use as a metaphor for you where you are in your own life, and that idea of behaving in such a manner, perhaps at least everybody's currently on this time frame is experiencing such an idea, so therefore see where this person reflects of you in one way or the other. In general, we don't consider this to be, well, like there's going to be some long-term effects that can linger, but we're now speaking about the infection or whatever they are called such itself. So not just governmental measurements, but the infection itself, likely again lasting those more months. We can't tell you exactly what months indeed, but a couple more months, and then likely this whole back and forth situation should be over, and you should be back to normal, at least in terms of your health, right? Doesn't mean there won't be any upheavals in the meantime, but nonetheless, that's likely a time frame that you have to expect. Now, we're aware through our entities brought forward that there is no such idea as experimental cause, etc. So we're going to share our perspective once again more in detail. There was indeed in your so-called region of what we are understanding is be somewhat of a biological experimentation field, Juan, whatever. Therefore, in this particular region, there was the infliction of, well, an experiment where indeed people were artificially infected, whatever you call such, right? As part of the experiments on what you would call biological warfare. Now, not necessarily the idea of infecting a entire area of the whole country, obviously, otherwise they would be infected themselves, or alone spreading somewhere else necessarily. So it was a biological attack. It was indeed, or is indeed, an accident while experimenting on biological weapon, how it would infect people we don't see it necessarily being spread over a bat soup, but it's obviously also very likely that it did in fact also are animals while there was being such a process, or it's also like it was first infected in animals such as bats first and foremost, and then after it was tested and brought it was indeed put into humans intentionally, but not with the intention of being spread far and wide. We're suggesting it's likely that the people that created such a virus also have a better cure, therefore the immediate area there's less impact than somewhere else where people did not expect such a virus outspread. It's a great possibility, but we are not suggesting it's necessarily the case. It's at least possible, since again, this was the offspring. But this is obviously the more direct, so to speak, political affiliation. But from a greater scheme of things, everything happens for a reason. And if your planet was not so heavily overpopulated, which you also mentioned previously, there would be no natural upheavals, either earthquakes or floods or something like this, right? So there's always more to the story. Same with your Illuminati, of course, when they're conducting some experiments or when they're conducting HAARP or whatever, and you're using chemtrails or whatever else you're thinking is all responsible for all kinds of problems in your world. The only reason anybody up there in your so-called governments, no matter what you're calling them, if you're using this catchphrase or something else, the only reason they're ever doing anything is because whatever it is that they're doing is somehow rated and in conjunction with the frequency of the rest of the planet. Otherwise, they couldn't be doing it in the first place. So there exists also another version of your government, unfitted versions of government, some that your ego mind thinks it would prefer, but your subconscious obviously doesn't, otherwise you would be in a world with another government structure, or where you would be in another position of structure, and therefore you can tell, because you're in this particular reality, it's very likely because whether it's you that you're pulsing out is also in resonance with your government of one country or another of your planet, whatever you call such secret societies or official government, doesn't matter. Whenever something's happening there, it's only happening, no matter who or what conspire to do so, because the whole event is in conjunction with the frequency that you individually and you collectively as a species are exuding, right? We can perhaps touch on our topic, but first and foremost, are there any questions on this particular topic that we just updated about?
Does anyone have questions?
We take it as a no. What about? Then the other idea we mentioned, we would have another topic, but also touch about it very longer, where there's numerous people in the room that have their own inquiries. There's the idea that you would perhaps turn still to a certain degree satanic or Satanism or, well, where there are numerous movements on your planet that have different ideas and judgments in this direction, and we're also well aware that your so-called spiritual communities of numerous versions are all more or less religiously inclined, and therefore perhaps more or less antipathetic or sympathetic towards this particular idea, depending where they're coming from. So what we're particularly referring to is obviously connection to our species, particularly whenever you're finding something in your so-called documents of any older culture, whenever there's some brotherhood of snake, brotherhood of serpent or dragon, etc., it's always related to our species. We like to put it out there. Also, very likely, your current religious development or revolution, devolution, whatever term you like to employ for a current change in your spiritual landscape, will unlikely result what many think is a so-called awakening. However, what's possible is the formation of a new, what you consider perhaps religion. However, a combination, what we would suggest, is of our ancient teachings, if they were introduced to some degree to your more wider religious field, which has been done in some of your perhaps quasi-religious or pseudo-religious or terms that individuals might use, there would be some equilibrium of being created of such a new spiritual alignment idea, but then again, what came out of it is more or less your current RFR, which again rejected the darker aspect of creation. And many of your religious or spiritual leaders have wheedled their way around it by accepting darkness or accepting even dragon beings or accepting serpents or accepting even something satanic, but in the end they're always using black magic or evil or other words simply to reject certain aspects of creation that they have then clustered away with such a concept. Of course, there are also ideas like the left-hand pass and the right-hand pass, and perhaps some of more tolerant religions towards those ideas, but even they're taking the left-hand pass to the fullest degree. So therefore, we would like to repeat our request for your so-called spiritual whatever the fuck communities to integrate both of those aspects, and not just their idea of accepting us the way we are, but for your very own plan. We would greatly suggest that we, as we're trying to meet you halfway, which is the main reason we start speaking through West in the first place, right? As a species, but also energetically, as we bring to the table that you come to the realization that if you're going to have some form of new spirituality, you replace all your former religions, it will likely be a conglomeration of both your so-called Aries, whatever the fuck, and some form of what you might likely term Satanism. Now, we don't want to pigeonhole any entity here with the label of Satanist, where it's more preserved from a certain religious angle. It's just the most threat in your world currently for a particular entity. Doesn't matter if you call him Prometheus, Renki, or Ihea, or whatever. He had numerous names, so it necessarily referring to the person, but more a spiritual concept and certain ideas and values that have been associated with it. Now, all of those ideas likely have to be combined if you would like to form something like it. Obviously, certain Freemasonic sects have been working on such. They have been corrupted, and they have likely been turned also over to one side or the other, just like your religions have. So again, an invitation here to everybody present or everybody listening to in another point of time, they can come up with their own ideas how to use both of those concepts somewhat in conjunction, as we cannot reach both of those aspects of creation and both of those groupings on your entire planet. We are just sharing with those that are currently willing to listen at that the vessels make this available too. Now, we're not expecting anything particular about this, or if there is, people can ask now something more in detail while we send some more water in the vessel. Otherwise, we can continue with your queue that you've set up personally.
Does anyone have comments? Okay, it sounds like we're ready for the queue.
Yes.
So Tim, you'll be up first.
Hello, class. Can you hear me?
Greetings, Tim. Yes, we can.
Yes, greetings. Okay, for my first and foremost question, I'd say the other day I was perceiving King Draco, and I started channeling that Draco. Did you understand more about that king?
Well, if you share more details, we can share more of him.
Well, the king had like a red cape, and I believe he had like a gold pyramid, and so it's going through me, so I can only go on the reflections of that. What details would you like to know?
We're a clearer image now. Yes, what was the coloration of the scales?
They were black.
Well, don't worry, you're not dealing with mortal, for example, right? As frequencies are similar to ours.
Okay.
Like the other one of the entities that we would consider royals, right? So not of necessarily of the royal bloodline, but however, the frequency of, in terms of what you would perhaps consider darker or lighter, is similar to our own. Or Vortex, for example, upon this range approximately, perhaps between us and them doesn't really matter much in detail, frequency-wise. Now, what was the relation to the entity?
Okay,
what's
my connection with that entity?
Well,
Because obviously, if I'm channeling this entity, I must have a connection, a reason for it.
Well, obviously there is some form of connection, otherwise you would not, establish this verbal communication in the first place, right? However, this does not necessarily mean that you have a past or present lifetime, etc., or that you whatever they're guiding. It's just that means that you currently pulled out a frequency, and then you get a reflection back that was the most conducive to what you were currently projecting out, but which of course can indeed translate to what you would term a parallel past, present incarnation, whatever the fuck, but then again, it comes from your current state, just to put you back in order there, right? Now,
Right.
if you want to bring the entity further, very easy, not much of a problem. You connect to our frequency, for example. You can as well connect to this entity since you can describe someone it looks, so therefore you also have a picture in your mind, right?
Correct.
Make sure you crown it before you're doing such, correct? Make sure
Okay.
you're also well in touch with your own physical form. You're not, again, as we have to remind any entity that's trying to produce what you consider channeling, make sure you're first and foremost aligned with your own physical form, so you're not running away from the physical while you're getting this state. We are always repeated over and over again, because most in your world until your vessel first leave their physical form behind and refuse to then connect back to it. That's not the case. That just means you're gonna get all twisted and confused once you get out of the state. That's not what we want, right? If we want something to come through, you need to be first in the place that you want it through. You can telepathically communicate, but if you want to bring something through, you need to be also connected to the word that you are bringing in. It makes sense, right?
Correct.
So therefore, make sure you're first and foremost well aligned with your Lord chakra system, correct? Crown, of course, your sacral, your solar plexus, and your dose, most importantly, before you're reaching outward. And then, of course, you can simply focus on the image that you're having up with in your mind, right? If this is what you're further intending to do.
Okay, that was a good explanation. So was he connecting towards me as much as I was connecting towards him? What did he have an interest in?
Every connection is mutual. There is no such thing as a one-sided being connected to another individual out there, or even down there on Earth. You cannot telepathically connect to anything without there being some form of mutual interaction, even if one person is only aware of it, right? So obviously, yes, and obviously in this case, the person was also linked to you. Otherwise, well, there would not have been such interaction in the first place. Always, not just in this case, always, there is always a connection in both sides, right?
Okay. Would that entity have any messages it want to give to me?
But there's obviously a certain interest in sharing information, also depending when you are. However, the entity is also perhaps more of a militaristic nature, so therefore we perhaps also more interested in someone in a militaristic situation on Earth, right?
Okay.
So we're uncertain how far you're capable of incorporating those particular frequencies in your day-to-day life. That greatly depends, unless you're doing what the vessel is doing currently, meaning verbal communication in such a manner. Or, of course, written, etc. Otherwise, the information coming through would likely be of a militaristic nature or of a strategic nature, etc. Of course, in the most general sense of the word, you can employ those concepts in numerous areas of your life, but it depends how creative you can get to do so.
Okay, so it was he wants a more militaristic. He has strategic militaristic interests, and he wants to use vocal channeling as part of it.
That's the approach, that's the word view or universal view of the individual, right? So that's the vantage point from where the individual is speaking. So therefore, whoever will be coming through will coming from such an understanding, right? Like an entity would be that's very involved with cooking or cleaning, etc., or with researching a certain topic, would likely negotiate with you on those topics, right? And not have much of an interest in anything that's not somewhat relevant to this. In this case, the individual's interest lies with the military. It is very common or a species, not always, but it is common.
So how am I serving this entity if I'm not? Obviously, I'm pretty militant by nature, but I'm not involved in the military.
Yes, that's the whole question we're bringing to the table. How would you be of service in such a matter if we want the individual to keep interest in your current incarnation? Depends greatly how you're using the methods, right? Like, for example, you also have different militaristic or perhaps military guides on your world, right? Like authors or strategists that put out certain ideas, your military create generals that still can be used by numerous individual people in civilian life, what you're calling such, right? We don't even have much of civilian life, but from mere understanding, Many of your civilians can also use in business, relationships, or personal one-to-one combat, etc. Certain methods, etc. You get the idea.
Yes. So he's involved in understanding strategies, the energetics of strategies, not just in the form of military.
Yes, not just energetics, but literally the methods. But it doesn't have to be in a military setting, but perhaps to see how and if being like yourself can use certain methods from such a being that has a militaristic view or a militaristic approach in their own life, bridging a gap, so to speak, of such a matter, if there's a possibility, like the way we are communicating with your species to see if we can incorporate the concept you're considering to be emotion you can consider, or incorporate the concepts and ideas that we are sharing, no matter what you're calling them, right?
Right, understand. So he's using me for vocal channeling to see if I can employ these methods of militaristic use that he does.
Yes.
Okay, it's primarily that's it with our connection?
That's the main reason. Currently, of course, can expand, evolve somewhere else, depends how far you're able and capable to produce results from where you're currently standing. Of course, we can't lay out exactly individual thoughts or ideas or reasons for whatever, but from what we are getting and what we are sharing, it's first for us right now. This, again, there might be something else following up, but that's the next move in the chess game, so to speak.
Okay, cool. All right, well, I'll leave you on that unless you have any further words or advice for me.
Just a reminder to make sure that you're aligned with your chakra system before you bring anything in.
Okay. Stay grounded.
Right.
Well, that's what he told me as well.
There
Thank you very
go.
much. Goodbye.
Much grounding.
Okay, water for the vessel if needed, and then Jacob's up next. Jacob, are you in the room?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just waiting for KALASK.
Should be fine for now.
Okay. Hello, KALASK.
Greetings, Jacob. Yes.
Okay. Before I ask any questions, I'll give you permission to work on my energy if you can, or whatever.
Yes, we're already are when you're directing with a certain individual, you're converted, you're speaking to them to a certain degree, we don't necessarily require permission per se, but we of course also allow invitation, such a matter, or a reminder or whatever.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was just giving him more focus because it seems that I get more distracted by the questions themselves, not really energy, which is not really good. Okay, but okay, so I guess, do you want me to just start asking questions right now?
Yes, you can verbal ask questions while we are doing everything else in the background, no problem.
Okay, because I wanted to speak about corruption, because I'm aware that there are certain Federation members that have put our solar system in quarantine and such, and they started falling into certain judgments towards the Empire in general, and they started getting a little bit caught into it, and then I suppose with their corruption, they start turning into what they were judging because that's their integrating mediator. But I was just wondering about, does taking like full responsibility for like our, well, at least in my case, the reptilian aspects of that DNA, can that just make us less susceptible to falling into that corruption if we take it in with full responsibility?
First and foremost, you're defining this corruption from your current vantage point, as you're saying already, it's their version of integrating it. So, coincidentally, or rather ironically, they're already working on their very own weaknesses by becoming corrupt, so to speak.
I see. Well, I suppose it just goes down to preference because it's like, you know, I like the idea of integration in that regard, but I don't really want to get carried away and start, you know, like eating innocent children or something like that, if you understand what I mean.
But as a metaphor, yes, but nobody's innocent. You're aware of that.
Right.
So therefore, the idea everything is just an experience, right? And of course, when you're saying you need to integrate certain aspects so you become immune to something, well, ultimately, whenever you are integrating something or an aspect or an idea or a philosophical concept, doesn't matter. Once you integrate it, then indeed you are immune to any trigger to it, right? For example, if you stole a car, right? And
Right.
somebody keeps talking about stealing cars, or that's a problem, there's too many people stealing cars, you're getting self-conscious about, you're getting triggered, right? Or you have insecurity, perhaps from a darker aspect, perhaps you are limping. And somebody mentioned that limping people are inferior, that should be done away with, right? The person might not know you're limping, but you are limping, and you are getting triggered, right? And of course, you're becoming immune once you're overcoming a weakness or you balance something out. And of course, there's no more trigger point. Therefore, always be thankful when there's something from the outside that in one way, shape, or form triggering you. Doesn't matter if you're calling it lighter or darker. Doesn't matter. Whenever everything that's from the outside and someone brings something up in your direction, then you see that someone putting a finger on the wound and you know there's a wound. So you don't need to thank the person for wounding or whatever the fuck. Just realize it's just a reminder and you can use it simply to improve yourself. And once you do so, it becomes a non-issue. Then you move to the next stage. And of course, the next, and you're always moving further. That's called evolution, if there is anything such.
Right. All right. I understand. So, I guess from what you can see from my energy right now, how compatible do you think my current genes are for integrating just reptilian aspects in general? In general, what unique ways would they manifest, at least from what you can see?
Well, first and foremost, you all have your basic brain, so your DNA is more or less aligned. To integrate those frequencies that you would consider reptilian, you have reptilian DNA.
Yeah.
So therefore, you're well equipped for that simply. No else necessary. However, it also depends greatly how well you are aware and how well you're willing to accept those particular frequencies. For your example, when you're judging, I want to be eating or killing innocent children, right?
Right.
The reason you're bringing this up is because there is a certain judgment you're still having for the Garg or certain aspects. Otherwise, it would be a non-issue. It's your trigger point or your corruption. And the reason it's the other end of the spectrum. The one side you're saying, there's lights for entities. The other side you're saying, there's evil beings. They're eating children. And therefore, on the other side, they're being corrupted because they're judging the Empire or they're judging darkness. Do you see?
Yes.
That's your internal conflict.
Right. Okay. So, you're saying that just like fully just taking complete responsibility for the fact that I'm judging that is a good way to relieve it and sort of understand the playing field more.
You do need to understand it. Well, like the understanding will come first and foremost. Just embrace it, right? Once you embrace those particular frequencies, no matter what you call those, understanding will come instinctually. Not so much that I need to intellectually understand them, but instinctually you will sense and realize what they mean and how you can use them, etc., once you're accepting of them, right? As long as you're still intellectualizing, you're not fully accepting them, and therefore you're fully integrating them. Much happens to your instinct, especially when you're judging earlier the idea about people should be getting more energy, not just focusing on the question, right? That's the point.
Right, I understand. Okay, well, thanks for that. I think those are my questions. I'll reserve the rest for Metax. Yeah, thank you, KALASK.
Verbal, and then you see, you understand, literally.
Yeah, very well. Goodbye.
All right, Alexis, you're up next.
Hi, KALASK. Can you hear me?
Critics, Lex. Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so I had this idea in the past to build a pyramid as a chicken coop. I realize this might sound a bit ridiculous, but I thought it would be a funny idea. So I had two intentions, like one for nutritional eggs and two for healthy chickens. But I think my concern, well, construction's been halted, and I guess my concern is that maybe the chickens won't like it. Maybe they might I don't know, become spiritually enlightened? I don't know. I really don't know.
Could you repeat the name for a particular device you're creating, or?
Okay, so it's like a home for the chickens to lay their eggs in.
I see, yes. Well,
Yes.
first and foremost, yes, one more. Their idea being I'm more aligned with our communication with the birdies, perhaps without freaking out to a certain degree, I remember what, so therefore, I'm perhaps more equipped to speak on certain ideas, so necessarily those chickens are particular our forte, but obviously will have a certain effect, no doubt about that, right? On the eggs or on the chicken. Now the question is, if you're worrying, right, then your worry will have a greater effect than the construction itself. So because you're putting in the energy of worry, it's more or less a neutral situation. If you have the idea, well, this will certainly be of great benefit, then you're enhancing it. If you're thinking, well, this perhaps is not such, then of course it will be that effect. It's simply just like a crystal or just any form of energetic, or perhaps one of your USB sticks that you can program, right?
Okay,
Doesn't matter,
yeah.
really. It depends what you're putting on there and what it will do. It just enhances. It's like, or your radio device, it's transmitting what you're sending, right? So if you're putting out the idea, well, that's what it will do, that it will enhance whatever you're putting in there. So in this case, yeah, likely it will have a bad effect because you're worrying, but it's only because you're worrying, not for another reason. If you put the worry out and therefore put something else in, then the other effect will be what will be enhanced.
Okay, yeah. I don't know how to let go of this worry though.
Well, ask yourself where it comes from. It has little to do with the chickens, it has all to do with yourself. Only reason you're connecting it with the chickens is because they're bringing something up in your own consciousness that somewhat connects to something that you're judging in yourself, right?
Okay, yeah. So I guess that comes down to that sort of sacral area.
Your own ex, yes.
Yeah, I realized the connection. Okay, so the other question I have for you is, have you been inside an inverted pyramid?
Numerous times, yes.
Okay, what happened to you?
But it's simply a structure. It only has the effect that you're making out of it. Obviously, again, it enhances, no matter if it's inverted or upright. It simply enhances where frequencies there on the other end. So it greatly depends where it's seated, who is constructed, what's on the top, the cap, etc. Right? So the effect can be a greatly different, while it's simply a nice, comfortable room, as far as I'm concerned, right? Individually. And collectively speaking, we have many of those artificial and many of those natural, well, you wouldn't consider it ruins necessarily, but more like in your Mojave Desert, something like it, just in such a form, somewhat conic, somewhat pyramidal, up or downsided, and simply a comfortable place to be because it can call and keep the heat, right, from the sun in our case. However, that's a very specific function. It can also source the same way funnel energy in general. And again, it greatly depends what is in the area, what is being put in there, etc. Also, what you are putting with you while you're in there, and also mostly what's on the cap. In my case, very comfortable. Individually speaking, many others of our species are also, yes, depends on what planet you're on, what situation you're on, etc., etc. And some of the spaceships even have employed such a structure for different reasons and can be switched to speak from one function to another one, because again, it's mainly enhancing whatever you put on there.
Okay. I have no further questions. Thank you, KALASK.
You're welcome.
Okay, water for the vessel, and then Zach's up next.
Greetings, KALASK.
Greetings.
Is there anything that you pick up on my energy just to start off that you'd like to share with me?
You're a little low on energy. Not you're speaking clearly, but your energy is somewhat low, right?
Yeah, I have been a little lethargic lately and not super inspired.
A little, yes.
Yeah, not necessarily depressed, but just not I haven't had really projects or goals or ambitions that have been spurring the energy within me.
Yes, you seem pretty worn out to us, right? You might not put it up or realize it yourself, but to us, you're pretty much worn out. Now, your solar plexus could certainly need some energy, but generally, you seem pretty much burned out, like a candle that's about to blow out.
Why do you feel that is? I haven't necessarily been doing a lot lately.
Well, obviously, you're missing any goals, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Is yeah, exactly. Do you feel, as far as obviously I think a big part of it is I've been burned out and that the channeling hasn't manifested in the way that I've liked, and I've kind of given up on it temporarily. And so that has been a big, I feel like I put all my carrying on with the chicken analogy, I put all my eggs in that basket, so to speak, and it hasn't worked out in the way that I would have liked, at least up to this point. And so is there anything further you'd like to elaborate on as far as the channeling?
You're defining it as it, like something that works out, something that is the subject while you are the object, right?
Right.
You can define yourself as the subject, and then you can decide how far it works out or not, and you can take responsibility how far it is working or not. And also ask yourself, if it does not work out, then why? And first and foremost, also, why are you not making it work out? And if perhaps there is something else you would rather do, but you're not doing it. There is no such thing as depression or boredom. They're both just symptoms of not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Is there anything that you could pick up on that maybe I'd be more suited towards, or something that I could do in the meantime until the channeling comes online?
Well, first and foremost, there is no time, so there is no meantime, so there is nothing you can do in the meantime between now and something else, because there is already now. Something you can do right now is talking to us, for example, which you are doing, and obviously get grounded first and foremost. You're also not grounded in your planet, therefore you're getting any energy from there. Also, what we mentioned previously earlier, the idea if you want to bring anything on the planet, you first have to be on there, right? If you want to talk to us, no problem, but if you want to bring something back from anybody out there to your planet, you need to be on your planet. Again, your solar plexus criteria needs some energy. If you're physically active, would help you, right?
Right.
Physically active. First, do some sport, just literally run, jump around, right? Be agile.
Yeah, I have started. A couple weeks I wasn't really doing anything physical, but the last few days I've started working out again, and it's definitely helping to infuse more energy into me, physically as well as energetically. And yeah, I guess to kind of go onto a different subject, in a channeling last night, I got Daniel Scranton. You're aware of him. He channels a lot of different beings. Just channeling the Hathors, and I asked him about a reptilian lifetime that I had, and he mentioned a lifetime of fifth dimensional reptilian that goes by the name of Karok in the Atarian system, and they mentioned that this particular individual was a bit more sensitive and compassionate than the rest of the individuals on the planet in general, and he got a lot of shit for that, so to speak. He felt a little out of place amongst the other reptilians. Can you feel into this individual or tell me anything about this individual?
We can certainly feel the collective. It's very annoying when such a person has such an effect. Now, obviously, we had a similar idea in our own corporation of what you would consider perhaps emotionality, so we can also relate to a certain degree. What we picked up is a bluish individual, rather skinny, or perhaps taller, skinny, ectomorph, whatever, for such a reptilian race or species. They are perhaps more in such a lengthy manner, perhaps more, ectomorph, perhaps more at least skinny or again, compared to us or others over here, necessarily a human being, or still very tall. Their bluish colorations are like ours, much lighter. They look decent. For reptilian, they look alright. Obviously, much better in their hair as monkeys, but for reptile, they look alright. And, well, this person indeed has perhaps incorporated more, well, emotionality, whatever the fuck. And perhaps you're reaching out halfway, so to speak, and therefore you're also experiencing the idea of incorporating certain frequencies that are unusual for your own world, right?
Right.
Which isn't necessarily emotionality, but it's rather the opposite. Now, you're also aware many other entities on your planet don't really connect to our species unless those are those faulty individuals that are no longer functioning appropriately, right? And some member of the Empire might consider us such, others might consider us still more hardcore. Depends exactly from which vantage point you're asking. We certainly, again, writing back to our second opening statement there, right? We suggest that your entire planet learns to incorporate those particular frequencies, not just for our sake, in the sake of our interaction between our species, but for your own species as well. So we'd suggest you not just reaching out to individuals having those same problems that you're having, but those persons are indeed more immersed in darkness and can use those frequencies to their advantage, because then you would also have more energy, right?
Right. Yeah,
So
just finding that
considering
balance.
another topic is not really, it's the same topic, just from another angle. Everything's interconnected in your own life and your own consciousness. Also, you're not having parallel incarnations or reaching out to entities if there's no relatability to your current state.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. And then for my last question, what's your perspective on the QAnon whole thing?
Well,
that whole movement.
We're following your earthly politics, so they're only aware of any of those things through the vessel. From what we're aware, this movement, so to speak, is largely delusional. It's largely focused on your current president of one of the North American countries, right? Also, certain counter movements to what you would consider per se the Illuminati, whatever. We don't see it really that much removed from it, however. Yes, we don't see this particularly a powerful movement or anything. It's likely just a passing fad or something. In general, unless you're being heavily persecuted by your so-called government, be certain that you're no threat to them. The whole idea of you can love the government to death or whatever the fuck, it's likely not gonna happen. So unless there's major upheaval, it's very unlikely it's going to be a major shift. But again, remember, we are following your day-to-day politics in one particular country, let alone the so-called movement on your internet or whatever the fuck. Those things are of no concern with us. What we're caring about is what most powerful structures, secret society governments on your planet are doing, especially when you're venturing out in space or they're preparing for war. That's what we would rather suggest you're focusing on, or at least what we consider more important, what certain groups or smaller individuals are doing on your surface planet that has a little effect on larger scheme of things of much concern to us. So therefore, we are looking in there in detail.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, it's mostly distorted, the information that's coming through.
There might be some truth in there here and there, but same as with the Chemuk person, it's largely nonsense, right?
Right. Okay. Well, thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for the energy. Thank you for the support, and much energy to you, KALASK.
Much strength, crowdness, power, and agility.
All right. Scraw 2010, you're up next.
The Sean person, yes. Purpose needs to unmute itself.
Sean, you unmute and speak now.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
Greetings.
Hello, KALASK.
Your audio is very bad, but we're picking up from your speaking.
Okay. First off, can you tell me what you're picking up from me in terms of being grounded, and my third eye?
You have to repeat unless another person individually in the room can repeat. We're not picking up from your exact enunciation.
It said, can you tell me what you're picking up from me in terms of being grounded and my third eye?
You're grounding it somewhat, alright? Third eye, well, you seem to have a dichotomy. The more you're opening your third eye, the more you're losing groundedness. So therefore, perhaps you need to bridge the gap there.
That's interesting that you say that. In the daytime, I focus on grounding and I do a lot of working out, exercises. Nighttime, late at night, that's when I focus exclusively on the third eye.
Yes, you don't need necessarily revite those things in timing, so we're not saying you need to do the same things at the same time, but in general, your own energy, it seems to be that you are, when you're getting grounded, you're losing touch with your higher mind, and vice versa. You're losing, most importantly, being grounded again. Always focus on being grounded. Take your groundedness into the night, so to speak. You don't need to work out while you're working on your third eye, but just keep the energy. Also, again, with the lower chakra system, make sure in general your whole chakra system is healthy and functioning before you're doing anything up there.
Okay.
Also, your throat obviously could use some help, otherwise you would not be manifesting this communication problem right now. Not just because of that, but in general, that's what's currently cropping up, not so much there are other interactions, but currently they're right here.
Okay, you said for working on the throat, kalasking and coughing or something usually helps?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Our last interaction, as you're aware, I was inquiring a lot about developing psychic abilities. I heard you say to one person in a group chat that spirituality to KALASK is based on developing psychic abilities. Could you elaborate on this more?
Well, the whole topic of psychic abilities in general, as well as spirituality, right? Our whole idea of spirituality would be connected to your concept and your understanding of psychic abilities, right? Not so much necessarily what many in your world might consider to be particularly spiritual, right? Like helping an old lady over the street or whatever the fuck. Which is perhaps more one-sided. Our general idea of what you would call spirituality perhaps is simply, well, using anything beyond the non-physical, right? For example, astral traveling itself, of course, you can astral travel, astral rape or kill another person. Which many people might consider unspiritual, but for us, that's the verge of spirituality. Simple as that.
I see. And obviously, this also has a lot to do with, you say that in your book that you connect to what we consider demons.
Well, you would consider entities demonic that are non-physical, right? However, that's a very broad term from your world and your religion that has been used for many different things. Once there's been an extraterrestrial race of more humanoid nature, that certain things that others of a humanoid nature did not like, and therefore they were called demonic in a certain structure. Your more ancient, older term of demonic, however, refers to non-physical entities also in general. Your daemon is not necessarily something negative or positive, but something more neutral, simply a non-physical advisor, right? So in this case, we are connected to non-physical entities. You would consider perhaps those particular advisors, and you would suggest you re-adopt the idea of being neutral, not necessarily something negative that possesses you. Of course, also entities can have a negative effect if they're non-physical on somebody who is physical, as well as a positive effect on somebody who is physical from the non-physical. As vice versa, you don't get energy attachment, so to speak, unless you create a connection to them, positive or negative. And our, what you might term a religion, is centered around, well, if you wish, demonology. Well, at least the way you would perceive it such. We're simply connecting non-physical entities are versions of ourselves in the non-physical, higher level versions, so to speak, as far as we understand, and they aren't fully KALASK anymore because they are no longer physical. But we're connected to them and we're learning from the same way we are sharing information through the vessel to you right now.
Okay, and what would be some of the teachings? What is the emphasis that you guys learn from them?
Well, many of this is difficult to enunciate in any of languages that make any sense to your own ears, right? As we're only translating ours to yours through the vessel as we're speaking English. Our content obviously would be for us to advance to higher necessarily explain. For example, it would include us integrating certain aspects that we are now trying to achieve by going back, so to speak, in frequency, by connecting to more primitive beings such as yourself, however developed some that you consider emotionality, even though albeit very chaotic, it is there abundant. We can incorporate those frequencies to then get to a certain level where we can receive the next teaching, so to speak. It's a class we skipped, you could say, and we're getting those guidance system. That's the best we can put. There's much more to it, but again, it's too complicated or not very complicated. It's just translate badly in a language that you could understand. So we're also sharing energetically whenever we are speaking most of that content we are having or getting through the vessel energetically as well as directly.
Okay, I see.
Well, to some degree, yes. You could better sense it better, you could see it.
That's right. One more question. In our last interaction, we were talking about me integrating your frequency and it being a win-win by you connecting with me and, let's say, learning more about emotions. So the question is, how could what type of situations or activities would be more conducive for you? Say, for example, if you were connecting with me in a moment, what would be activities I could do would be more conducive for you to learn from me?
Anything that really brings up a great emotional upheaval, like strong emotional anger, hatred, obviously are more easy relatability, but also the idea of greater pleasure, for example, right? Or to pleasure and pain are also, as you're aware, very closely connected, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whenever you can bring those ideas in, again, pleasure likely is something that's first more relatable to us than what you would consider for happiness or fun or, well, fun to a certain degree still, yes, but in general, the idea of serenity, happiness, that we try to connect to the cats is likely something we cannot directly incorporate in the same manner, but when you have something like a joy, fun, or enjoyment in general, the pleasant sensation, pleasure is perhaps the best neutral term of a pleasant experience that's connected to your own consciousness, that conjures up the right idea of what you could put yourself in, that's somewhat indecipherable for us still. It doesn't go too far to what you consider the light, but it's interesting enough for us to incorporate compared to perhaps pure hatred, etc., which we, of course, have well developed. But the idea of perhaps having some pleasure, enjoyment in conjunction there, or even separate from it, that we can somewhat latch onto.
Okay, as far as you're concerned, the activity itself, sports, politics, whatever, it's not really important. It's the feeling that you're concerned about.
Well, that's the whole concept, isn't it? The idea of incorporating what you consider emotionality, the idea of picking up on this particular idea you consider emotionality. Of course, you have to be in such a state where you can harness that.
Yes, I know. I was just inquiring about specific activities.
Yes, for example, sexuality obviously would be helpful to a certain degree, right? Because it would activate your sacral, the lower chakra idea. Those emotions are connected to those concepts are easier for us to integrate than, for example, what's connected to your so-called heart. It's very unrelatable to us, right? So, of course, also when you're enjoying play, etc., those ideas are still somewhat relatable to us, right?
Okay.
Of course, when you're in altercation, etc., that's also relatable, but also simple and easier for us. We don't necessarily need it from you. It's also interesting, however, when you put yourself in such a situation when you are, well, sparring whatever, right? That can also make it easier for us to come over, but it's not necessarily helpful for us. It might be for you, but for us, it's more helpful when you're incorporating ideas that more connect to your idea of pleasure, etc., connect to your sacral, perhaps. Those emotions, not the ones that connect to the heart, if you understand the difference here. We're just using words from your own language, right?
Yes. Okay, I understand.
Verbal. And thank you for the question, it's certainly interesting.
All right, no problem. Try with you next time.
Okay, water if needed. And then Lisa, did you have any questions?
The Lisa person, yes.
Lisa? Okay, well, if Lisa's not on the line or doesn't have any questions, I think this ends the queue for KALASK.
Wonderful. In this case, we leave the order as much strings in order, direction, and we collect the kitty cats. KALASK!
Greetings, Metax.
I hope I'm understandable.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Very nice. Just have some water in, David, but if there are any people that have an query, they can already speak up while I'm doing so.
Tran, you're up next.
Greetings, Metax.
Greetings. Greetings, Tran.
I have an experience that happened a few weeks ago that I would like some clarity about. So, I took a substance in a very small dose, and I found that I would say that it enhanced some abilities that I already have in terms of being able to detect which beings are around and seeing visual cues and things like that. And then a few weeks later, I tried, I guess, what you could call a different brand, which was apparently in a much smaller dose. And so in order to have the similar dose as the previous time, I took a larger quantity. But it did not feel like a smaller dose. It felt like a much higher dose. And for the period of time that I experienced this substance, I kind of felt like I went insane. And it was a very interesting experience for me because at the time that it happened, I felt like I was trapped in some dimension where where I could not really perceive of any higher dimensional beings. And it really felt very much like I was stuck there permanently, which of course was not true. But at the time, that was absolutely how I felt. And so based on that experience, I have something of I suspect I have something of a better understanding of what it feels to be like insane. But then I realized, looking around after that experience, that we are all stuck in some personal world, which is not exactly the same, but like a version of that. that everyone is actually stuck in their own little universe with these particular beliefs, which may or may not be true, but it feels absolutely true to each of us.
That's very much a part of your current human experience. No, substances of any such an idea can enhance of where you are currently already at, so it also reflects back to your most strongest convictions, also your connections to other people or the lack thereof. So therefore, in this case, more perhaps the lack thereof or the enhancement of differences and unrelatabilities. However, in one way, you could say your entire blend is insane in such an idea that you are all stuck in false time constraint that you constructed for yourself, but there's also, of course, just an experience that you're deciding to have. There's nothing wrong with having such an experience either. As the saying goes, the insane person doesn't know they're insane. So their idea there being that your entire species could be considered insane from out here. But of course, you could also all consider each other insane, depends what group you define yourself to belong to. Certain people that define themselves belong to a certain religious or political affiliation or another conviction that they have is very strong, or even just a subculture. And everybody outside of it is wrong about their concepts, and by others they would be considered insane, and you more or less come together in public interactions. There are certain agreements like collective insanity, so to speak, as Earth insanity, where you all have your own filter bubble. It's perhaps a better term than calling it insane, just a filter bubble that you interact with. And then you go into your smaller bubbles, and then you get smaller bubbles, and ultimately your own self-consciousness, and then you're perhaps your schizophrenic individuality is actually a dividuality, because you also have all different aspects to yourself. And when you go outside of your own planet, you also have the human family, and then you have also mammalians, etc. And everything that's not directly pure source energy is in that way considered insane. It's just that your current planet Earth has a certain level that's very widespread of what is considered acceptable, a certain big filter bubble, and when you're stepping outside of that, you would likely consider yourself insane. However, the idea that there are no non-physical entities is an illusion. It's just you decide to disconnect from them and hence your own self of disconnection in general while you were under the influence of a substance that you apparently ingested from the outside, which however you could also theoretically at least produce yourself. If there's going to be something like a change on your general plan, if you would like to call it ascension or anything, it's not necessarily happening in such a manner as many people are imagining, but something like this could indeed be the case for members of your species that decide to take their own life down a certain route. So in one way you could say you're all stuck in your own filter bubble at all times. You're just not as aware of it as you were in that particular moment. The fear that you will likely connect to it likely comes, however, from the idea of being isolated in it. And your perceived illusion of being disconnected. You're always in your own reality, so to speak, so you're always disconnected from what you would call other people. At the same time, you're always connected to them and us out here.
Yeah, it was a very interesting experience. I mean, at the time I was utterly terrified, but it was the very first time that I can recall where I had no sense of time, and I kind of I lost all sense of memory, and it was like I was a floating consciousness rather than like this solidified being with a timeline. So this is the closest that I've experienced to what perhaps you mean, as in that there is no time, because it was very unfamiliar, and I really panicked at the thought that because it felt so much like it was a permanent state, that I would have, had to continue this incarnation, but without any sense of memory or being able to use my mind, that I had lost all control of my mind, that it was just floating.
Indeed, when you're beyond time, you're more often in that state, but it's not necessarily connected to panic, which is also why certain substances can give you a sneak peek, but ultimately it's perhaps recommendable to get to those states, what you would call naturally, which again can be stretched over what you experience at time, but nonetheless you can also literally have it instantly if you wish so without a substance, but then again it requires work on yourself. See it as a sneak peek, but the idea still being if you don't get there naturally and you do it on a push of the button, so to speak, it can be overwhelming, like setting a person who has never learned to drive a car into a car and tell them to drive. They still might manage to drive a certain direction for a while, but they have a great potentiality of crashing or just feeling overwhelmed and extremely stressed out because the whole situation, we call it, is overwhelming.
Yes, I kind of felt like if somebody had been pushed into a pool of water and they didn't actually know how to swim yet because they'd never even been in water. I think that's much closer to what I kind of felt in terms of being prepared for it and panicking, because I was not expecting that state. I was expecting something very mild.
I understand. However,
you
from your
mentioned-
higher consciousness, there must have been a willingness to experiencing such a more intense state either, or you would not have put yourself in a situation, no matter what physical attributes
Yes.
you might connect to it. Right.
Yes.
So a part of
That's
you
what
was willing.
baffles me.
Part of you tricked another part to perhaps take more or another substance that was different dose than you thought, or whatever else you did there, or perhaps in combination with something. It doesn't really matter, but another part of yourself tricked your lower consciousness into experiencing a state it was apparently not ready for, but you never experienced something you're not ready for, at least on some level. So perhaps you needed that experience because you do not evolve unless you do something that's new to you.
Yes.
Like, for example, the first time you're traveling on an airplane or going to a place far away, or you're signing up for a job or anything else, really, that you might consider scary at first, but when you're through it, you're afterwards either have learned something, even if you might not like the experience. That's how expansion happens.
Yes. So thank you very much for your perspective, Metax. I'm getting feedback that I'm close to the end of my time, so I would like to send you love and appreciation, and I will take what you've mentioned here and apply it to the way that I think about that experience.
That's a good idea, much love, and of course, feel free to reach out to me whenever you are in such a state. Even if you have the impression that you cannot reach me or any other entity out here, we can still energetically connect to you should you ever find yourself through any means in such a situation ever again in your own experience.
Yes. Thank you. That is comforting. Okay, thank you very much, and bye for now.
Much love, yeah.
Much love.
Hey, Metax, can you hear me okay?
Hello, Ryan. I'm picking up from your speaking. I hope you can pick up from mine.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Well, first of all, I think there's some synchronicity going on right now. Like a few minutes ago when Tran was talking, the delivery person came and delivered a book to my door. It's a book that's about Well, it's like a copy of Plato's writings Timaeus and Critias, which are about Atlantis. And like my questions for today are about Atlantis. So I think that's kind of funny. It's some weird synchronicity or something. But anyway, like my first question, like you and KALASK have mentioned that there was some asteroid impact that had to do with the sinking of Atlantis. Like, would it be possible for me, like, if I sent you a map of like our GPS coordinates, like, would you be able to tell me like the exact coordinates where this asteroid hit?
I understand you're very much stuck up on interested in details. I can of course share the concept of what's happening if you're interested in coordinates. Yes, I could give you a very great likelihood where there was such a strike, but remember, when the more detailed you're getting, the more clear I can give you an answer, but also the more variance there is in timelines and multiplication is in there of other options happening. But if you want to have an answer that's mostly connect to your current timeline that you are asking from, then I could give you certainly some form of coordination, yes.
Okay. And like, so before I send like the map, I mean, can you tell me in general, like what part of the Atlantic Ocean it hit in? Like, was it like the north part, the south, east, or west?
From what I'm aware of, it was like the northwestern region.
Okay. All right. So like another question, you mentioned there was a person who lived in Atlantis who was not fully human and inspired the Bible story of Jesus. Can you tell me a little bit more about who this person was in general?
Well, there were many beings in your world that you have a certain interest in, individually, particularly Jesus personally, individual that has attributed or contributed to the story. It was later written down, has been inspired by numerous people. Now, of course, in the Atlantean region, there was simply one person who had lived there who was something perhaps like a Jesus character in the society, introducing new ideas, etc., to the culture that was by some liked and by others disliked in such a manner it was perhaps similar. Some of those ideas likely dealing with what you would consider compassion or general sense of communal responsibility, etc., basic living principles, so to speak. The person was what you would perhaps consider a hybrid.
Okay.
So, well, you have the whole Bible story of the Immaculate Conception, I believe.
Right.
That's what you're calling it. Yes, it was not necessarily what you would consider likely immaculate in a literal sense, that there was sexuality involved, from what I'm aware of in those cases that are being connected to the story. However, what was perhaps not so earthly in terms of the conception. So the later connection was likely more like an immaculate deception, and the idea of those stories being lumped together and mixed up originally was simply a sexual interaction between a female from the planet that you're currently on with somebody that you would consider likely an extraterrestrial visitor or an angelic entity, which in your Bible story is referred to in the name of Gabriel. So the person would somewhat be likely, from your perspective, perhaps a human or a humanoid entity, just not from your planet fully, but partially.
Okay. Do you know?
Yes, some of the abilities the person, for example, had in your latest story likely came from this person that had those abilities from the particular differentiating heritage. Go
on. Do you know, like, how long before the sinking of Atlantis he was born and when he died?
Can't give you exact dates, or I could, but again, when you get into those details, especially when it comes to numbers, there's a great malleability, and there's also then the greater possibility of faulty. It was likely somewhere in the middle, so it wasn't immediately after the downfall, but yes, your whole flood myth also is connected to that, but there were numerous floods. Obviously, there was a flood after that, being the sinking of Atlantis, and the flood before that, so it was in between those. There were also certain groups that were stationed further north, which were necessarily particularly connected to the Atlantean continent, but they also sent troops further down south, and therefore the storyline has been so distorted that it's difficult to give exact details, but as far as the lifetime is concerned, it was somewhere around the middle of the existence of the civilization. There was also the relation to your Seder area of what you might likely consider then a so-called Holy Land, but that was not a time frame. And again, a story there has been mixed up with that original story from that person, as well as another content from further up north, which there has been termed Cyberboreal or other terms, and the whole civilization existed more in the area that you are in now.
Okay, so he died long before Atlantis sank?
He did not die in the sinking of Atlantis, if that's what you're asking.
So was he alive then? I mean, like, did he experience the sinking?
He died long before the sinking, yes, and no, he was not crucified.
Okay. You said something about like a Seder area. What is it? What was that word again? Seder?
If you're referring to the area that I just mentioned or in direction right now, was likely referring to what you would likely later consider the Holy Land, or the Mount Sinai, or your Caucasus region. This whole area stretching up there. It was likely that there was also, well, there was spacecraft traveling from the area Europe was located, well, mostly in northern Canada region. The continent has later been termed Hyperboreal also. There was also a larger, similar with Atlantis, there was a larger civilization, Greenland, likely being a center of it, stretching further east, Iceland, west, further north in Canada, and many beings from there traveled with ships, both to a later civilization of Atlantis and Lemuria, which again had this battle, conflict, warlike situation, during which there was an attack or an artificial meteor strike. And they also had a connection to another civilization that dwelt in what you would now consider your Caucasus, southwestern Russian region.
Okay.
And the whole idea of your so-called Nephilim is what happened in this particular region that was connected to this civilization.
Okay. Well, I only have like 1 or 2 minutes left, so this will probably be my last question. But do you know the name of the large city in the southern part of Atlantis that KALASK mentioned began with the letter A?
Perhaps Atlantica, that gave the city a name.
Say that again. What was the name of it?
Atlantica.
Can you spell it, please?
Well, it's a possible spelling your current Latin alphabet. It's just a possibility. A L A N T I C A.
Okay. Was this the capital of the Blue Race?
Well,
okay. Was it like exactly on the coastline?
was somewhat more inside the land. And there was more like coastline. The way Atlantis is structured, there were a land bridge that connected two islands before it, so it was it was directly connected to water, but the water was still perhaps more like a lake. It was not directly connected to the outside sea.
Okay.
Again, the more details you're asking, the more wishy-washy it's getting in such a sense. Or at least I'm giving a detailed answers on one particular timeline. I was not present there.
Okay. KALASK mentioned that some cities had a much larger population than Atlanta. Was this one of them?
Likely. However, also remember, if I'm sharing details like words and names of cities, it's also something I'm conjuring up from your current time frame reality. It doesn't matter if the Atlanteans, if you term them so, they actually called those cities by the same names.
Okay. Can you say in general what the city looked like? I mean, did it have like tall skyscrapers or what?
It was more further stretch. It was also perhaps something more like a harboring city, or whatever you call that.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I guess my time is up, Metax. Thanks a lot for answering my questions. Yeah, I'll let somebody else speak now. Much love, and I'll talk to you later.
Much love and information to Ryan. And water for Darren.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Okay, Jacob, you're up next.
Hello, Metax.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to speak to you. I'm here to just bring Kane again, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm very much aware that the sire I've connected to him and I can bring him in if you wish so right now.
Thanks, Metax. Hello, friend.
Hello.
Yeah, I was just have one sort of extended question just regarding the same topic we've been discussing in our previous sessions. What kind of details that I might overlook can I expect to see from A's dimension in terms of like its species, society, the planets, the cultures, etc.? If you could give a rundown, that would be cool.
No. Are you asking for details if you're wandering on the planet or just not certain what location you would like to be at?
I suppose, yeah, I suppose like the letter and just in terms of like what locations I might want to keep an eye out for, and just in general, if just an overall idea of what I could expect, I suppose.
Well, there are certain peculiarities present in the landscape, like mountainous regions. If you want to experience something like that, palm trees. Well, not like on your planet, but you would likely think of palm trees.
I see. So what planet is this for?
Well, the one you are currently on.
I see. Interesting. So, just in terms of just discussions of like what, I suppose like species, society, and culture, stuff like that. It's just because it's very extended sort of galaxy, I suppose. You know, there's like many locations and such. It was just regarding what's typical if in exploring over there.
City dwellings are somewhat more different likely than what you would be used to on your planet, for example, but doesn't mean there are not others out there that don't have a similar dwellings. Like rounded roofs, there are flat rounded roofs. Most, from what I'm aware of, have conic shapes or pyramidal shapes. Those are more rounded, outspread.
I see.
Perhaps some of your garages where you park your cars, your larger areas, you're aware of what I'm referring to.
Yeah.
It might look
Lisa.
something like that from first sight, just more round.
I understand. Interesting. So, guys, interesting. So, what are sort of species most prominent there? If, in my case, if I were to experience that.
For example, there are some reptiles, perhaps not as intelligent as likely the ones that you are used to speaking to this person, perhaps more on a low dimensional level, but still intelligent enough to have somewhat of an own societal structure.
Right. Yeah, I was expecting that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Is there any more to it than just reptiles? I'm assuming that there's a lot more.
Yes, certainly. They're not necessarily most important. Likely, there are other species. There are beings that would also remind you perhaps of a hybrid between a giraffe and a bird-like being. It's difficult to explain. A more mammalian entity, but not quite.
I see.
They are aquatic entities that can dwell on land, but are mostly in the sea. The reptiles are somewhat connected or similar looking to what you widely consider raptors or the deinonychus in terms of their facial features.
Right. Interesting. Are there any felines there?
Not on my consciousness level, but entities that are by the broadest sense considered feline, yes.
I see. Amusing. So, are they also hybrids, or or is that dependent on just the location? Some of them are just like mixed, others more pure species.
They're more or less feline, but they're likely more on a consciousness level that makes them what in your perception part of the fauna.
I see. I understand. So, in terms of like the whole galaxy, you're saying it's a little bit more of a primitive sort of structure.
Compared to what I would consider high advanced civilization, yes, to your own beliefs, that might still be a neighboring or relatable civilization.
I see. Amusing. So in terms of like technological structure and everything like that, it's a little bit more comparable to us. Okay, so are they aware that they're creating their own reality and such to a large degree, or is that sort of a little
similar
bit more
to you?
I see. Interesting. Okay. I believe that's all I really have to ask, unless you have any more additional details to bring up regarding it that I might not notice.
Well, just keep in mind everything is a reflection, so their awareness also greatly depends on your awareness, since you're creating a version that's also relatable to where you currently stand, just coming from a different vantage point, right?
Right. Okay, I understand. I believe that's coming close to my time period, so unless anyone else has a question to ask you, it should be, unless Christy, how am I going for time?
Yeah, you're right there. You're right.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kang. I appreciate you coming in and connect more to your planet as much as I can, and I'll see you next time.
I enjoyed the interaction.
Okay, thank you. Much love to you and Myra and your whole collective.
Your whole collective? Is there anybody in the collective that wants to speak to me, or so I could back to Metax? Alright.
Welcome back, Metax. Does David need water?
Yes, that's a good idea. One moment.
And then Casper will be up next.
Greetings, Metax.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Casper.
As you may know, I've been dealing with some physical ailments around my tailbone or root chakra for several years now, and I tried practically everything to heal it, but it only seems to get worse. So I would really like to speak to an ET who is able and willing to cure this issue and preferably also the chronic fatigue syndrome I'm dealing with. Are you able to put me through to such a being?
First and foremost, everything is psychosomatic, so you're obviously also creating the issues from your non-physical, and there's nobody that could heal those ailments for you because you're creating them yourself, and if somebody would take them away from you, you would recreate them. With that being said, I can connect to entities that are perhaps more personally related to you, or we can work on this together. Depends what you're preferring.
Yes, I would very much love for you to connect me to such a being.
Do you have any preference for any particular species or anything else?
Well, obviously, I want someone who's benevolent, but other than that, it can be pretty much any species as long as they're able to help me.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, yes, hello.
Do you have a name, and what species are you?
Yes, you could consider me size. I'm of the same race as Metax. I'm related to David, and I'm here first and foremost because we requested for someone who perhaps looks more in your energetic field right there, and perhaps Metax considered I'm more succinct with your frequency. I have an easier time working with you. Now, it doesn't really matter who does those things. As Metax already shared, you're creating your own issues. So if I wreck on your energy right now, I can easily do so. Same way as your doctor can give you a pill to make your headache go away. But if you keep reading and running with your head against the wall, you'll still keep having a headache. So while I work on your energy, describe exactly the sentiment that you're perceiving that's causing you what you consider an unpleasant sensation.
Sorry, could you rephrase the question? I didn't quite understand.
Yes, what exactly is the sensation that you're experiencing and what you considering a tailbone? Does it run up your spine or is it local?
Well, it's mostly my blood veins that are bulging out and that are kind of painful. So it's that the rectum area in particular, and also a little bit around the tailbone sometimes.
Obviously a grounding issue, yes.
Yes. So, what would you suggest me to do?
Ground yourself, obviously. And also ask yourself why you're struggling so much with grounding itself. Well, or why you're fighting against grounding. You're fighting against grounding. You're fighting against your physical identity and your current life. There's a lot of pain.
I'm sorry. Was that a question or a statement?
A statement. Your chronic fatigue likely has the same issue, the same origin.
Okay. But so I mean, I suppose that the whole thing doesn't come about because I don't visualize Root going down to the earth frequently enough. So can you like give more of an explanation about what it is that I'm doing wrong or what it is that I'm supposed to do?
It's not about using visualization to have such an experience. If you use such visualization, it's just like the pill that you're taking while you keep running against the wall. You refuse to be who you are. When it comes to grounding, it's more important than using a visualization or doing anything outward. It's more important you embrace your current experience, your idea of who you and what you are. You're rejecting your own identity.
And can you say in what way do I reject my identity?
You can define this childhood trauma if you enjoy that, but ultimately you had those ideas before you created a trauma. So it doesn't really matter what you define it such, either way now it's there. There can also be a relation to the sacral, but it's mostly the root.
Okay, and then so now that it's here, what can I do to fix it, if I can use that word?
Fix it is a good word, yes, and you have to do it. However, find out or admit what aspects of yourself you're rejecting. Okay, especially what makes you you in your current life. You can assign this past if you like, if that makes it easier for you. It's not really the past, but you can assign it as such.
Okay, well, is it because I don't really own my power and my masculinity, and I kind of like shut down in order to try and please other people? Is that the thing?
That's your way of phrasing it, yes. That's the way you experience in your day-to-day life. Pleasing others or is perhaps a manifestation of it. The reason Metax asked upon me is because I likely will let this threatening or confusing energy to you because I'm of a feminine orientation. However, it doesn't really matter who does this. Ultimately, you need to work on those frequencies.
Okay, so are you saying again that I need to be more selfish, like you told me the first time? Is that the basic message?
If you want to use that word, it's perhaps a more negative connotation in your own mind, but maybe that's what you need. Self-loving. Perhaps if you want to term it selfish, that's also fine. Self-accepting, perhaps more neutral. Yes. And when it comes to what you consider your own masculinity, your physical identity and everything that is entailed in that, all your aspects, everything that makes you currently your biology, your body. Everything that makes you you currently as far as you are a physical being.
So what did you say about these things that I should do about them? I should accept my body and the way I am, or what was the point?
Yes, the way you are, that's a very general concept. Yes, your biology first and foremost, your physical form. Yes, everything. Everything that comes up in your own mind when you think of who and what you are physically.
Okay, so you mean I should not, I should try not to be so ashamed of things, or what? I'm not sure how exactly to
Yes, shame is certainly always another very recommendable option. I would suggest, especially when it comes to your sexuality, or if you want to term it masculine, but in general your sexuality and everything is connected to it, not just your physical gender, but the sexual energy in your physical form and the way it relates to who and what you are.
Okay. And anything else that you would suggest me to do?
Be more honest with yourself.
How so?
Not necessarily overplaying things with humor or with enjoyment when you're not. Also acknowledge when there is something you might consider an issue. No need to dwell on it, but acknowledge it's there. It could be very helpful.
So you mean like in feeling my feelings or what?
Yes, for example. Also in your communication with others.
Okay, you mean not being so afraid of what other people think?
Not sugarcoating anything, yes. Not censoring yourself. Not censoring yourself seems to make a good reaction, so let's go with that.
Okay, well I sense that when I don't censor myself, I do get into a lot of conflict. But
yes, but that's also your own projection. You create conflict because you expect it.
Okay.
Expectation is creation.
Okay, and then my last question: Can you see what it is I'm supposed to learn from this illness?
Simply self-love. In the particular manner that I just described. When it comes to learning lessons, it's not so much of an intellectually understanding what the deal is. It's more about listening to your own body, what it has to tell you. It's very often energetic, but listening to your own body, it would be a good start.
But it seems a little bit strange if my body is kind of making me ill, which makes it harder to do the things that you're just suggesting, like being.
That's why it's happening. You are creating that. You're defining your body as something outside of you that does things against you, and that's creating the problem.
Okay. Okay.
You're rejecting your body to some degree, and that's what's creating it.
Okay. So, any last advice from me before we say goodbye?
I will put you back, or, well, there's also sort of fear unnecessarily. Ease into the process. That will make it a lot easier the more you dwell on the issue and make it more of an issue, the more you're condensing the energy rather than opening it up. You make it more deal out of it than it isn't. That's how it becomes a bigger deal.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much for all your suggestions, and you're certainly welcome to keep on healing me from time to time if you want. And much love and appreciation from me.
Much love, and remember, it's mutual. If you open up further, I can work on you. If you don't, I can't. That's up to you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Very welcome. Any other individual or idea anybody wants to bring to me? Goodbye then. Yes. Magnev. Wonder.
And Sean, you're going to be up next.
Better now. One person have inquired to me, or perhaps not individual.
Lisa, did you want to speak? Well, we can cycle through and see if there was anybody else that wanted to speak to Metax.
Are there any further inquiries?
Unless Ryan, if you wanted to ask a couple more questions, that would be okay, and then we'd be at the end.
Yeah, hey again, Metax. Well, like, I guess like picking up, like when we were talking about Atlantis, you kind of mentioned, and like you mentioned before that I'm kind of obsessed with Atlantis, and like, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like this other book that was delivered to me today, it's a book called, well, it's kind of like similar to it has to do with the world of the Game of Thrones TV show that I think David might be aware of. But like it's about like an ancient civilization that was kind of like wiped out, and I don't know, it's fiction, but it's kind of similar to Atlantis, and like this stuff just like really interests me. Like, should I don't know, do you think I'm like wasting my time like being interested in this stuff about like Atlantis and like, you know, fictional worlds like the Game of Thrones world? And I don't know, like what are your thoughts about that?
Well, there are numerous aspects. First and foremost, there's never wasting of time, just because there is no time. If you're excited about something, there's always a reason for it. Just remember, I'm sharing details with you. I suppose not as relevant to you as the general experience. Like, for example, if you're reading a fantasy novel on a certain subject and the author comes up with fantasy names or makes up different names for different things that really happened or are happening in a different timeline or reality, that might not be as important what filter the author is using or filter David has when I'm speaking through him, etc., what filters you are having while you're interpreting or analyzing something. But the general concept in this case, for example, that of a sunken continent. Now, with that being shared, of course, we could say that you have a parallel past incarnation there when the whole tremor happened. However, you also, of course, increasing the likelihood by focusing on it. So again, it's the usual thing with incarnation. What was there first, the chicken or the egg, your current incarnation or another one? Since everything is instant. So when you're having excitement, there's nothing wrong with following it. From what I'm aware of David, he is not necessarily familiar with your television show, but with the general idea of what this parallel fantastic story is that you consider Game of Thrones. And I'm aware of David through certain other similar tales in his younger years have come to understanding of the non-physical that he did not have earlier. So therefore, I would suggest it's likely beneficial to people in your world to focus on such concepts so it helps them to understand that there's more than what your scientists at least admit or willing to acknowledge. So I wouldn't consider it a waste of time. Just be more aware of that certain details are not as important as the sensation that they bring up.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I know I shouldn't like focus too much on the past, but I mean, like I think you and KALASK have also said that like anytime somebody's obsessed with something, it's because it's bringing some value to their life, even if they're not aware of what that value is until much later on. So, like, do you think maybe it's something like that? Like maybe I don't know why now. Like I'm so obsessed with Atlantis and history in general, but like in the future, maybe it'll make some sense.
Using concepts of past, present, or future, which are only real in your mind, but in your mind to make sense, so why not go with them? Yes. You can't dwell on your so-called past or on your so-called future if you're desiring. The question is just what's the benefit in doing so, and yes, indeed, that might be subconscious.
Okay.
So I would suggest that you keep focusing on what brings you this excitement and idea in general, no matter if you can understand now what the benefit is. It might also be something else entirely. I just don't get stuck on details. For example, if you get pulled towards Atlantis, then by all means focus on Atlantis, but not necessarily the idea of general sunken continents, or not necessarily exactly what city was located where on the Atlantic continent, unless this particular detail is what makes you the most excited and interested. Perhaps as a metaphor, the idea perhaps if you absolutely want to go to a certain place, then by all means go to that place. But once you're there, don't feel you need to stay there forever because you felt inclined there, even though once you've been there for a while, perhaps you just saw for a few things, like a ruin somewhere, or you drank a cup of coffee somewhere, and that was the real reason why you felt pulled there. But because you felt pulled to the location, or you feel you need to stay there, even though you're now being pulled somewhere else, but now you're focused on the place. In other words, always make sure you follow your guidance system. Don't get stuck on names and labels and all of those things.
Okay. All right. Well, just one more quick question, and I'll let somebody else talk. You had said that Atlantis sank about 12,000 years ago, and Mu sank about 13,000 years ago, with Lemuria sinking sometime in between. Did Lemuria sink closer in time to the sinking of Mu or Atlantis?
Mu, Lemuria were more or less connected as a civilization, so it depends great just using those terms from your own language. It's not like I'm using those terms or you're using those terms for continents on your own planet. From what I understand, those civilizations were more or less connected anyway, so parts of them sank during the conflict, and some of them sank earlier, the other ones sank later, so again, that's where you get to the details that are perhaps not as relevant, because what I'm sharing is Mu or Lemuria are more or less one and the same thing in different locations or different culture. That's like perhaps United States and your Alaska and your Hawaii.
Okay.
Hey, Ryan, we're going to let Sean in and see his mic's working now. He was in line for Metax and the mic wasn't working. So if we could let Sean give a try now.
Okay, yeah, Metax, I'll say goodbye. Yeah, again, much love, and talk to you later. Bye.
Much love for you, Ryan.
Okay, Sean, speak up if it's working. Is anyone hearing Sean? I'm not hearing him on my end.
No, I'm not picking up from when he's speaking.
Okay, I know he wants to speak, but we're having mic issues and I don't think we're hearing him come through. So I think we're getting close to the end of time.
Squirrel, your mic still says muted, so perhaps if you could try to hit the mute button.
Or if you could just like type in the group chat or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if there's a general inquiry, I can also answer such.
Can anybody hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good. Hello, Metax.
Hello, you're sounding far away, but I'm picking up from your speaking.
Okay. I talked to KALASK and I asked him about my root and my third eye, and he said that every time I work on grounding, that I lose touch with my third eye. When I work with my third eye, I lose touch with my grounding. Could you please explain more about this?
It's very possible that your sense of identity of who you are in your physical world doesn't fully allow the integration of anything you're picking up from the non-physical. And when you're on a non-physical, you have an easier time connecting the concepts out there, but you're basically schizophrenic in this case, not like mentally speaking, but energetically speaking, or in terms of your direction, you're having trouble incorporating in your life certain ideas that you're getting from up there, so to speak. So it's easier for you, like, for example, in your dream state, many people accept a lot of information in a dream, but when they wake up in the morning, they say it was just a dream, and therefore you dream strange things, and so things aren't, and they go about their life, never accepting anything beyond the physical. Not that this would be the case for you. Obviously, you're already able to interact with the non-physical, but there's still somewhat of a concept like that.
Okay, so obviously it sounds like I need to work on self-acceptance.
Everything ultimately always comes down to self-acceptance, self-love of your will. In this case, accepting those particular aspects of yourself, yes.
That's right. Besides that, how can I also bridge the gap between grounding and third eye?
Same thing, really. Accepting your ability to integrate those concepts without necessity of getting outside of your current physical reality. Also, perhaps judgment you fear from other people, or not necessarily so much from other people that they might bring to you, but more like who you are in relation to other people, depending who you are in relation to yourself or in relation to anything non-physical. Doesn't mean you have to start channeling in such a manner, but perhaps the idea that you're okay with getting certain energies or from entities such as myself or others, at the same time still interacting with beings in your own world and sharing information with them, not necessarily from me, but in general.
Okay, I see. All right.
Always starting with the grounding is certainly a good idea, yes.
Okay. Also, for a long time, after I have a workout, lots of physical exhaustion, I always get the migraine headache. It starts off with my eyes. I can't see very well. Then it's followed up by a headache. And this happens faithfully every time I do a workout. So my impression is that it's connected with my third eye. The
Of
fact
course.
that, yes, exactly. So how can I mean, obviously I could work on my third eye, but it's also a reflection, a message in this reflection. And could you tell me what the message could be besides the third eye?
Well, first and foremost, it is simply your third eye not being fully active or being restricted. Melatonin could likely help you because you would get more in a sleep state. DMT would likely help you activate your third eye, but you don't necessarily need to introduce those substances from the outside, since your pineal gland, pituitary gland, can produce those substances naturally. Darkness could also help you to get into a more sleep state. Of course, you could do what you might consider any form of meditation, but ultimately you could also reach out while you're working out, which is grounding, wire the third eye, so you're also more careful. For example, before you start an exercise or set of working out, you could first feel into your physical body. So not necessarily, okay, I'm warmed out now. Intellectually, it makes sense. I'm warmed up. I can stretch the muscle. I can now use it. But first, also sense energetically if you're ready to work out on this particular body part. Remember, the third eye is connected to your intuition, and the more you train your intuition, the stronger it gets, the better the third eye works. So if you're getting this infliction during workout, make sure you're listening very closely to what you're currently doing. Maybe you just need to sit for a few moments before you do an exercise, or lay down between exercises and sense into your abilities before you continue, or anything of those scenarios. Try to connect to your third eye while you're in the exercise or in between.
Yeah, that was my next question. Why, if this is a message for myself, a reflection, something I need to pay attention to, why does it have to always be initiated by a workout? If it's something that I need to pay attention to, why does it always wait till I go for a jog? I mean, what is that all about?
Because then you are in a state of grounding. That's when you're grounding yourself the most. That's when you are in that state, which then again rejects your other part, like your third eye. That's when the energy in the root gets stronger and perhaps retracts from the other energy. And there's again likely you're making certain substances. Of course, you could introduce from the outside if you wish. A doctor would likely tell you something like that in your world, and by all means consult one of your medical practitioners if you're not certain. And then you can get a prescription likely of substances that will alter the sensation. But if you want to solve the situation energetically, I suggest that you again get back to the issue of introducing psychic sensation while you are physically active. Again, it's all about bridging those gaps.
Yeah.
And see it as a challenge that you can grow from. You will likely make great strides in both areas once you bridge the gap.
Yes. I'm on a path of leading toward developing more of my psychic aspects, psychic abilities. So, what other, besides the third eye and grounding, what other chakras could I work on that would be more conducive toward that direction that I'm going in?
Perhaps your throat chakra. Again, there's a reason that you're having this current interpretation of your, I'm picking up from your throat that there is some blocking in your cheeks likely, but it's related to the throat. And of course, you're having the current technical issues with communication. It's always indicative.
Okay.
That's also closely related to the third eye, so it's perhaps beneficial that you're talking about it, not necessarily just now and here. Your sacral could also, well, most in your species could also need a certain touch upon, but in your particular case, the throat also is an issue.
Right. Okay.
I'm just chiming in. We're 5 minutes past our 2 hours. So this should be last one.
Okay, all right. One more question. Any recommendations on what I can use to work on the throat chakra, like KALASK, suggested KALASKing and coughing? What do you recommend?
Speak the truth at all times, not necessarily you're lying otherwise, but perhaps censoring yourself. Again, the idea it was also shared with Casper to a certain degree. You're censoring yourself in certain situations where you're not fully speaking exactly what you want to speak. That's always the best form, without any artificial tricks, or, well, not tricks, but any artificial means. If you're just always open, communicating, also when you're listening closely and you're not speaking unnecessary words, only speak when there's a reason and say what exactly it is that you want. Be more precise and concise in your interaction. That's usually what helps the best.
All right, understood. Now, thank you for that, Metax. Until next time.
It's lovely, Sean. And I believe we have then reached the end of our current interaction. Much love to the entire collective, and I look forward to speaking to any of you individually or collectively. Again, another point of what you will call time.
Much love, Metax.
Much love, Metax.
Yeah.
Bye, Metax.
Much love, Metax.